Okay, so today we are diving deep into, well, a topic many of us thought was kind of settled history, really, but it's roared back.
Definitely roared back. The trigger, that statement from former President Trump saying the U.S. should uh, begin testing its nuclear weapons again.
Exactly, that one line. And it puts this long-standing pause on nuclear testing right back under the spotlight.
It really does. Our sources are calling it, and I think rightly so, one of the most, dangerous debates of our time, potentially.
Right. So this deep dive, what we want to do is unpack this. Look at the history behind the pause, what testing even means today, technically speaking.
And crucially, the geopolitical fallout. What happens when you even talk about restarting explosions? We've got a lot of analysis here on that.
Yeah, what would it actually mean for global security? It's vital stuff.
It is, because you really need to get the last, what, 3 decades? The science, the policy, to understand the dilemma now.
Okay, let's start right there then. The history. We're calling this bit the end of the explosions.
A good title.
Because the U.S. hasn't set off a live nuclear explosion since 1992. That's over 30 years of holding back. A moratorium.
A self-imposed one, yeah.
But maybe we should quickly touch on why testing stopped back then. It wasn't just goodwill, was it?
No, not entirely. I mean, there were several factors. A big one was the environmental cost, honestly. Decades of tests, atmospheric, underground.
Yeah, the legacy there was pretty grim.
Absolutely. Ecologically, politically. And then post-Cold War, the U.S. had immense diplomatic leverage. Stopping tests became a tool.
A way to pressure others.
Exactly.
Right.
It was framed as this moral, environmental stand, but it was also smart foreign policy at the time.
Okay, so if there haven't been any actual detonations for 3 decades, how does the U.S. know its existing weapons, the deterrent? How do they know it still works? That's the big question, right?
That is the question, and the answer is this huge, frankly, incredible scientific effort called the Stockpile Stewardship Program, SSP.
Right, SSP. So the U.S. stopped the explosions, but didn't just, hope for the best.
Oh, absolutely not. They poured billions into labs, supercomputers, diagnostics, all sorts of high-tech stuff.
Stewardship. That word seems important. What does it actually involve? How do you steward a nuke without setting it off?
Well, stewardship essentially swapped physical explosions for predictive science. Think massive computer simulations.
Like virtual nuclear tests?
Pretty much, yeah. Running scenarios on some of the world's fastest computers. But it's also hands-on, non-explosive experiments.
What kind of experiments?
They actually take apart older warheads. They replace components that degrade over time. They test the materials under intense conditions, heat, pressure.
But they never let it go critical. Never the chain reaction?
Never. That's the absolute rule. It's all about modeling reliability, understanding aging effects. It was a massive technological jump, really changed the game for nuclear readiness.
Which makes Trump's comment about testing like other countries do so striking. It feels like a direct challenge to this entire 30-year scientific approach.
It absolutely is a political challenge to the scientific consensus that underpins the moratorium.
And that forces us, I think, to look at the difference between the talk, the rhetoric, and what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, which leads us straight into the next part, figuring out rhetoric from reality. What's the immediate status? Because officials responded fast.
They did. Washington was quick to say, look, this statement doesn't mean we're about to see mushroom clouds tomorrow.
Definitely not. The Energy Secretary was quite specific, saying any upcoming tests would be non-critical.
Okay, non-critical. That sounds important, but also technical. We need
Yeah.
to define that, right? What does non-critical actually mean if it still involves testing?
It's crucial jargon, yeah. Non-critical or sometimes subcritical tests. They
Yeah.
use real nuclear materials like plutonium and chemical high explosives.
Wait, real plutonium and explosives? How is that not nuclear?
Because they're designed very, very carefully. The whole point is to set it up so that a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction criticality
Hmm?
is physically impossible. It cannot happen in these tests.
Ah, okay. So you get data, but without the nuclear yield,
Yeah.
like a lab experiment using the real stuff under pressure.
Exactly. They're often called hydrodynamic tests. They use conventional explosives to crush the plutonium, mimicking the implosion part of a weapon.
Simulating the trigger, maybe?
Precisely. It lets scientists see how the materials, especially aging plutonium, behave under those extreme forces. They're checking the trigger physics, not the explosion physics.
So these non-critical tests are actually part of the normal SSP. They've been happening.
Yes, they're a known, highly technical part of ongoing stockpile maintenance, routine in that sense.
Okay, so if the physical risk of a boom hasn't actually gone up yet, Why are all the analysts sounding the alarm just over the top?
Because the political shockwave is instant. Our sources really hammer this point. Just suggesting a return to testing changes the whole global conversation.
How so?
It fundamentally challenges the norm of restraint, a norm the U.S. itself championed for decades. When the biggest nuclear power starts questioning the need for live tests.
Everyone else pays attention and starts rethinking their own plans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone listens. Everyone reassesses. It immediately injects instability, even without a single gram of plutonium being detonated in a test explosion.
Which brings us squarely to the nightmare scenario, doesn't it? The global chain reaction.
Yeah. What happens if the U.S. actually walks away from the moratorium and restarts live explosive tests?
The warnings we're seeing in the source material are pretty dire.
They are stark. If the U.S. does this, it could trigger, well, a rapid arms race, something we haven't seen the likes of since the Cold War. One analyst called it a new, uncertain nuclear age.
Let's zero in on the main players. Russia, China. Why would they feel forced to follow? Is it just tit for tat?
It's deeper than that, I think. For Moscow and Beijing, new U.S. testing signal a couple of things. First, maybe the U.S. is developing new warhead designs.
Ones that could upset the strategic balance, better yield, smaller size, that kind of thing.
Potentially, yes, it raises that fear. Second, it gives them perfect political cover domestically.
Ah, the justification angle.
Right. They can immediately say, look, the Americans are testing, so we have to test too to make sure our own stuff works, whether it's older systems or new ones they're developing. It counters any internal opposition.
That sounds like a recipe for uncontrolled escalation. What about the bigger picture? The arms control framework. It's already looking shaky.
Collapse, that's the word sources use. The whole fragile global arms control system relies on restraint, especially among the big powers. Treaties like New START are already under stress.
So U.S. testing wouldn't just endanger one treaty.
No, it could shatter the entire architecture. Decades of diplomacy, verification regimes, trust building, gone. Just like that.
And it doesn't stop with the big powers, does it? There's a ripple effect downwards.
Absolutely. Think about those nations sort of on the edge of getting the bomb. Maybe they have the tech know-how, the materials.
But they've held back so far due to international pressure.
Exactly. Or deterrence norms. If the U.S. restarts testing, it sends a powerful signal. It's like a green light, suggesting the old rules don't apply anymore.
That nuclear restraint is now optional.
Pretty much. And that could cause proliferation risks to skyrocket. Suddenly, building and testing your own bomb looks like a viable, maybe even necessary option.
So if the U.S. breaks its own voluntary pause, it basically tanks any moral authority it had left on non-proliferation.
Completely. The U.S. goes from being the, arguably, leader pushing for restraint to being the one leading the charge back to Cold War testing. That's a huge shift.
Which transitions us perfectly into the legal side of this, the treaties, specifically the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT.
Right, CTBT. Signed back in 1996. This was supposed to be the cornerstone of stopping tests globally after the Cold War ended.
The goal was simple. End all nuclear explosions. Everywhere. Forever. A big ambition.
Hugely ambitious and symbolic, a global commitment to step back from that brink.
But here's the detail that often gets glossed over, and it puts the U.S. in a really tricky spot on this. Its actual status with the CTBT.
This is the absolute crux of the current legal and political debate. The United States signed the treaty back in '96, showed intent. But it never ratified it. The Senate never gave its consent. So, under international law, the U.S. isn't legally bound by the CTBT's terms.
So wait, even though the U.S. has followed the rules basically for 30 years,
Voluntarily.
it kept a legal escape hatch open, unlike, say, the U.K. or France, who did ratify.
Exactly. Their restraint has been a matter of policy, of scientific confidence in SSP, but not a strict legal obligation under that treaty.
Which means if Washington decided to restart testing,
the legal hurdles are lower than for ratified states. But the political cost? Our sources warn it would be catastrophic. They say decades of nuclear restraint could unravel overnight.
Even without formally withdrawing from the treaty, it never fully joined.
Yes, because it shatters the political understanding, the norm that has held for so long. The U.S. would instantly become an outlier, maybe even a pariah, on arms control.
It feels like that non-ratification is this loaded gun on the table.
It is, and just threatening to pick it up, just talking about testing again, destabilizes everything, whether or not an actual explosion ever happens.
Okay, let's try to pull this together. What's the current expert consensus? Are we actually about to hear a test blast somewhere in Nevada? What's the likelihood?
For now, the consensus seems to be that the chance of a full-scale actual nuclear detonation remains low, probably.
Why low?
Well, think about the practicalities. Preparing a test site takes time, massive resources, the cost is enormous, and the immediate international backlash would be intense. These are powerful breaks. The focus officially is still on those non-critical tests within the SSP.
So the real earthquake isn't geological, it's geopolitical. It's about shifting the boundaries of what's considered acceptable debate.
That's it, exactly. Nuclear weapons are suddenly forcefully back in the conversation, in a way they just haven't been since the early 90s.
And that alone, the talk itself.
That alone reshapes global security, as the analysis puts it. It injects volatility, uncertainty. It tells the world that nuclear deterrence isn't this stable, managed thing anymore.
It's back to being a contested political football.
Right, the conversation is the action here, in many ways. The threat, the possibility, forces adversaries to react, to spend, to recalculate, even if no test occurs.
Which leaves you, listening to this, with a pretty big question to ponder. Is this talk just talk? Will it fade? Or is this statement going to be seen historically as a genuine turning point?
The moment the post-Cold War nuclear order really started to fray. Or just, another warning in the storm, as one source puts it, of ongoing great power politics.
We don't know the answer yet, but what seems clear is that the era where nuclear testing felt like a closed chapter, that's over.
Definitely over. Simply by reopening this debate, the world has stepped into a new and much more uncertain nuclear age.